Hello, everyone, and welcome to a different version of the interviews you're normally used to seeing. My name is Alchemist, and I am joined by someone who probably does not need much of an introduction, but I'm going to ask him to introduce himself anyway. If you could introduce the people who may not know who you are.
My name's Eric Barone. I'm also known online as Concerned Ape.
And if I'm not mistaken, as Concerned Ape, you also have done just a smidge of game development in your past.
True, yes. I'm known for making the video game Stardew Valley.
Now, this is the part where I'm going to tell you, if you haven't heard of that game, first of all, where have you been living? What planet? Like what's the atmosphere like there? But if you happen to be a person who is a fan of other genres and you may not know about Stardew Valley, the best way I can describe it is if there's a thing that you want to do in a single player experience, be it cave diving, farming, romance, more than likely it is in Stardew Valley. I initially was introduced to Stardew Valley through a friend of mine. I want to say it was like in 2017 because they were obsessed with the game. And I was like, I mean, I'll give it a shot. Most of the stuff I'm playing now is playing a couple of RPGs right now, so I'll give it a shot. And I think I own it on at least 2 platforms. I know I have it on PC, and I think I have it on Switch as well. And we're here at the Seattle Loves Indie Creators Expo. So Eric just got off stage talking with Ty Taylor about just kind of a fireside chat about game dev. But I would like to focus on the things you're doing kind of outside of that. So I know that this is kind of the start off, the kickoff for PAX, which is a very busy weekend for most people, both developers, creators, and fans. So my first kind of question is, what are you looking forward to most outside of Slice for PAX weekend?
Well, I think the biggest thing is the Stardew Valley concert tour. Our second official Stardew Valley concert tour is kicking off on Friday here in Seattle. So that's going to be a big deal.
Now, as a person, like, again, I've been gaming since NES days, right? So there's a couple of times where I can think of music really being kind of impactful for a game. And I remember the first time I saw like the Final Fantasy concert tour, and I was like, that's awesome. That's something I really wasn't expecting to see. What is it like for you to see a concert tour for the game that you initially composed in your game, like going around the country?
It's really surreal, you know. It's like, especially because, you know, I made the entire soundtrack just sitting at the computer, clicking notes onto a screen. There was no live instruments involved whatsoever. So it's like, this is like just transforming it into something that, you know, I never imagined. And it's just totally beyond just being this electronic video game thing. It's like a real thing. And we're in a real room with real people playing it.
So yeah. What is kind of piggybacking off that? What was the process like? Like taking the music that you put into the game and kind of seeing it perform? Because I imagine you probably would have seen like a couple of rehearsals of things like that.
Well, we did have so this is the second Stardew Valley concert tour. Right. There was the first tour, and with that, there was a lot of, I don't arrange I compose the music for the original game, and then there's a arranger who transforms it into like all the different parts for the orchestra. Right. So there was a lot of back and forth with that, where the arranger would send me the scores and like kind of like a MIDI file essentially, and I'd listen to it and be like, this doesn't sound quite right, or let's change this, or this note is wrong, so there was a lot of back and forth originally. That was for the first tour. We kind of nailed a lot of stuff down. For the second tour, it's been a lot easier. I trust the arranger at this point, and like he knows what I want, and so it's kind of, there wasn't that much back and forth.
Gotcha.
Actually, I haven't heard this second tour live yet. My first time hearing it live will be on Friday.
Okay.
So I've only heard MIDI files.
Gotcha. Yeah. But I would imagine that more than likely, especially when you're considering orchestra music, like that's something that they are drilling and rehearsing constantly. So if you're hearing MIDI files, it will probably be fairly close to what you can expect on stage.
It'll be way better. That was my experience with the first tour. Like when I heard the first tour, I was like listening to MIDI files. I was like, oh man. But then when I actually heard it live, it's like, oh, this is great. Like it sounds so much better than the MIDI files.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's one thing I have to ask, and this is kind of a hypothetical pie in the sky style question, right? So over the last, I would say 5 years, we've seen video game adaptations in TV shows and movies really start to be a lot more polished, a lot better in terms of kind of how they're presented. If you could convert Stardew Valley into another medium, right?
Mhm.
And any medium you want, comic book, anime, anything you want, which would you like to see it converted into?
Well, it would depend on who's doing it. Before David Lynch passed away, I was
Mhm.
saying that I would let him whatever he wants to do, and I would just let him do it. I'd be like, you take it from here, whether it's a TV show or a movie.
I get that. That's fair.
Unfortunately, he's not with us anymore.
Yes, sadly.
So at this point, it's like maybe if Miyazaki wanted to do it,
That was
I would
exactly
also,
the person I was going to say.
yeah.
Like, could you? Okay, I know that this is kind of a formal interview, but I have to say, could you imagine? Like, I'm trying to imagine what that phone call would be like for you. Like, you're like, what? I'm sorry, Miyazaki, like Elden Ring Miyazaki or Howl's Moving Castle Miyazaki? Which one are we talking here? Oh, that one. Yeah, sure. I'll take the call. Can you just give me 1 second? Yeah, just 1 second. Yeah, sure. That's great. So I imagine I imagine other crossovers have been similar to that. Stardew has shown up in a couple other places. Like,
Yeah.
most notably, I'm pretty sure I remember watching like one of the Balatro trailers
Oh, yeah.
and seeing Stardew as one of the crossovers for that.
Yeah, there's a Stardew Valley deck of cards in Balatro.
I have to imagine that it is very satisfying to have a thing that you made, that you did the music, you did the art, you did all of these things for, and then seeing it cross over and show up in other places. Like, I imagine that's surreal.
Yeah, it is cool. It feels like an honor,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
especially if it's a game or something that I'm really a fan of too, like with Balatro or Terraria. There's those games are meaningful to me, so it's really cool to do something together with them.
I dig that. Okay, that is all of the game devy questions I'm going to ask, because I want to ask kind of what are some other things you're looking forward to at PAX. If I'm not mistaken, you're going to be at PAX, but not in a panel. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Right. So I'm actually in a steel drum band. I've
Makes-
only been in it for a year.
Okay.
But we're going to be playing at PAX, and
Dope.
we play a lot of traditional like calypso music, but we also play some video game music. So we're doing mostly video game music at PAX.
Okay.
And we also play some Stardew Valley songs. That's actually how I got involved with the band, because they were playing a Stardew Valley song.
Already, you were like,
well,
I know that song.
Someone in the band recognized me on the street, and they said, "Hey, you're the guy who made Stardew Valley." I was like, "Yeah, that's right." And they're like, "I'm in a steel drum band, and we play one of your songs. Would you like to come to one of our practices and check it out?" So that's how I kind of got involved with them, and they threw me on a pan and started having me play right away, like at that practice.
You're just like, all right,
and
well,
yeah,
I'm going.
And I kind of took to it pretty well. They were like, you're pretty good. You can join the band if you want. And I was like, okay. I've always loved the steel drum, just like the sound of it.
Yeah,
the sound of it. And I've never actually seen one in real life until I joined the band. But it was probably because for whatever reason, a lot of like Super Nintendo and like soundtracks had steel drum in it.
Yeah. I think it's because it translates very well to like the more simplistic kind of, when you're taking music and I don't know why I'm telling you this, like, you don't know, when you're taking a complex song and you're converting it into a game, you have to kind of, the instruments you choose have to translate over. So I imagine that's why a lot of steel drums probably got used in early games, because it's an easy sound to kind of replicate.
It could be, yeah.
So
yeah.
That's a guess. There are some things that I know a decent amount about. Converting music into games is not one of them. So don't quote me on any of that stuff. I might be completely off. So, okay. So I imagine, just from the bit of time that we were kind of waiting before this interview, there are constantly people walking up wanting to talk to you, wanting to get your feedback, because a lot of those developers up there have been in a spot where you were when you started on Stardew. Are there any people outside of game dev that you think you would end up kind of starstruck meeting?
Well, I mentioned him earlier. David Lynch has always been a big someone that I looked up to as like just a creator who like really seemed to follow his whatever he wanted to do, whether it was successful or not. And some of his things were kind of unpopular because they were not like pleasant, like the Twin Peaks season 3 was very challenging.
Yes,
but I thought it was awesome that he just did it, whatever he wanted to do, and like I really respect and admire that kind of artistic purity.
Yeah, I get
So
that.
I would have been starstruck if I met David Lynch. Unfortunately, I never had the chance to do it.
Unfortunately, but I mean, it's one of those things that like I find this as well as just one of those weird kind of things. If there are people that I look up to that I know that there's not going to be a chance of me meeting them, I try to do things that I think they would find compelling or interesting
Yeah.
or things like that. Because for me personally, it gives me that little bit of connection to them and lets me kind of in some small way kind of show how I feel about them.
Right. You're like honoring their legacy.
Yeah, in the ways that I can, right?
Right.
Because there are some instances where there are people that you, and in some cases, there are people that are still living that I feel that way about. And it's just, I know that there's not a chance of our paths crossing. So I try to do other things that I think they would find compelling or interesting or honoring their legacy, be it someone that is passed or someone that's still alive.
Right.
And I can only hope that in doing that, I might inspire someone who's watching me the same way that that person inspired me. And from what I gathered upstairs, I'm fairly certain that you have inspired countless people.
Well, that's I'm very grateful and happy that if that's the case.
It's not a if that's the case. That is definitely true.
That does make me think of one other person. You know, like I met the creator of Harvest Moon,
Okay.
Yasuhiro Wada.
Okay.
And that was a little bit nerve-wracking, to be honest, because my game is heavily inspired.
Yeah.
But what you were saying about there's kind of like a chain reaction of people inspiring other people. And I would say, you know, Mr. Wada definitely inspired me. And so, you know, it's kind of everyone who's inspired by Stardew Valley in a way is being inspired by Mr. Wada and his original idea, what he did with Harvest Moon. Because Stardew would never exist without Harvest Moon.
Yeah, I definitely, I've had people say like, oh, well, this is inspired by Stardew, which I'm completely fine with. What I've always had an issue with is that when people say like, oh, well, this is just Stardew with additional features. Because I played Stardew and I played Harvest Moon. The inspiration is there, but what you've done with Stardew is significantly more advanced and involved, in my opinion. It feels like taking that concept of a cozy town building and kind of elevated that to the next level. Right. So that's my opinion. Opinions are subjective. That's the phrase I can say. There's another version of that can't say. So there was a question that kind of came up during the fireside chat that I wanted to piggyback on. And Ty asked excellent question about if you tried to release Stardew today, do you think it would be as successful as it was? I have a spin on that question, if you don't mind indulging me for this.
Sure.
I genuinely believe that without games like Stardew, we wouldn't be at the point where indie games are releasing as frequently as they are. I think there are a couple of tentpole indie games that kind of showed people like, I really can do this. So my question is a little different. Considering how much Stardew has inspired not just different game genres, but also indie game developers, do you think that now with Twitch and with the ability to really connect with people on a more personal level, do you think that the success of Stardew would have been a steeper incline instead of the one that you currently had?
No, I don't necessarily think that.
Okay.
But I think it's because, like you said, like well, the whole landscape has changed. Maybe Stardew Valley is partly responsible for that. So it's kind of almost like a Inception type question that you're asking. It's like, if it came out today, well, would that be with Stardew Valley's influence on the indie game world or not?
I would in the question, I'm assuming that it's without, right? I'm assuming that that the indie game.
Yeah.
Let me phrase that a little bit better. If we were to take all of the differences in like streaming and in content creation around and how big that has become, and you were to release Stardew today, do you think that it would have taken hold as tightly with those communities, or do you think it would have been larger with how many more creators are kind of out?
You know, I'm not sure. It's like partly because of there's so much Twitch and streaming. It's like there's almost like too much activity that it's like Stardew Valley is kind of a relaxed, chill out. It's not a high intensity it's super short attention span. So like maybe it wouldn't have clicked. You know, it's kind of like now that it's so established, people play it, but it's like sometimes you wonder if, you know, in today's world, the way to be successful is to make something that's very like boom, 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 like of the moment.
Gotcha.
And not this kind of, you know, but who knows?
I get that.
You know, another thing that, well, never mind. I forgot what I was going to say. Go on.
I completely get that.
Yeah.
So the last question I'm going to ask you, and this one is going to be a very, very random question. So you mentioned that you gave some streamers keys to Stardew in the beginning when you kind of were first kind of kicking the game off.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about how you envision the relationship between content creators and developers, because that's one of the things that I think is very important when it comes to indie and AA development, whereas AAA development kind of takes it for granted because they know I'm putting this huge marketing budget behind it, and because of that huge marketing budget, it's going to get in front of creators. Tell me how you kind of envision the relationship between content creators and developers.
Sure. Well, I think that content creators and, like, you know, Twitch streamers, YouTubers, all this stuff is the new way of basically marketing your game, I would say. You know, I don't think people care that much about like what big media companies have to say about games, to be honest. It's really, it's more about individuals that they trust, you know, and they're seeing them on, you know, Twitch, YouTube, all these platforms, and they're kind of like, I think that's it. Yeah. It's like if you're an indie dev and you want to like market your game, I would say you need streamers to play your game. Like that's the way people are going to hear about it, essentially. So yeah, I think it's a definitely we have like a partnership in a way, you know. It's like we're creating the content for you guys to play, and then, you know, you're essentially giving us advertisement for our games. So it's like there's a mutual relationship. So yeah, I mean, I think as devs, we appreciate people who, you know, take what we create and make it fun and entertaining for other people to engage with it. I love the Stardew Valley, you know, content creator community. There's all kinds of really creative and interesting stuff that people have done with the game, which would never cross my mind. And they come up with all kinds of funny and interesting things, and just kind of creating stuff that, you know, enriches the entire community for everyone. So I love it. And I think that it's great. I did want to say one more thing.
Sure.
I remember what I was going to say.
Oh, good.
What I was going to say was that you were asking me the question about if Stardew Valley came out today. I just want to say one thing is that when I was making Stardew Valley, I had the same thought of like, you know what? We're already past the golden age of indie games. It's over. There's no chance. There's too many games coming out. And that was 10 years ago.
Right.
So it's like, I feel like there's always going to be like part of your mind, if you're an indie dev, of like, it's too late. We've passed peak indie game, you know, golden era. But it's like, it's not true. You know, there's always going to be another big indie game. Maybe it's yours. You know, that's what I would say.
I cannot think of a better way to have ended this interview, because that is kind of the message that there's always going to be a golden age of indie games, and you're always going to feel like you have missed it. I missed the boat. I missed the boat. I missed the boat. But we continue to see amazing indie games coming out. And yeah, the landscape may be a little bit crowded, but that doesn't mean that your community for your game doesn't exist. In some cases, you don't know that your community for your game exists until you release it.
Right.
So if there's anything that I can kind of say to add on to this, if you don't mind me adding on to your point, continue to work on that game. Continue to make the game that you want to play, because you never know how many other people want to play your game. Eric, thank you so much for joining me. I had a colossal time talking to you, and I hope that you kind of enjoyed getting to sit down and talk a little bit less purely focused on gaming and some of the other cool things going on around this weekend.
Of course. Thanks for talking with me.
Look forward to talking to you more in the future.